I'm your host, Alna, and welcome to this monthly insert on COVID-19 that provides a platform for journalists to ask experts any questions they might have over the pandemic. Now, this program is brought to you by the Namibian Media Trust and the DW Academy. I'm just going to ask all the participants, if you do have questions throughout the session, simply raise your hand, or I don't know, Emily, have we activated the chat bar that they can post their question? Okay, you can post your questions in the chat bar. And for the social media users, we are broadcasting live on Facebook. So if you have questions or comments, please do put them in the comments section. Now with us, our expert for the day is Frederico Links from Namibia Fact Check. Good morning, Frederico.
Good morning, Alna.
How are you doing?
I'm good, under the circumstances.
Frederico,
How are you doing?
I'm fine, man. I'm so used to this lockdown story. It's like a piece of cake.
Yeah. I'm actually starting to like it, to be honest.
Yeah. Listen, Frederico, quickly tell us why is this session so important? What are we planning to do here today?
Yeah, I think, today we'll be talking about sort of the falsehoods, the disinformation, the misinformation that surround the rollout of vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines specifically, and that have become really problematic. Now, this is not new, of course, but the falsehoods around the COVID-19 vaccines have become really pronounced since the actual rollout in parts of the world in December last year, December 2020, when people have started being vaccinated in the US and parts of Europe and parts of Asia. That's when, the falsehoods around COVID-19 vaccines have really just, as I said, it's become really pronounced. It shot through the roof. And now it's just permeating, especially social media and messaging platforms such as WhatsApp. And, it's in where research has already been done around the effects of this disinformation. It's shown that there is vaccine skepticism has grown. It's shown that vaccine hesitancy has grown. A lot of people are hesitant. And it's shown, there's really a growing anti-vaccination, sentiment spreading out there. And we see a lot of this now on Namibian social media as well, where, this anti-vax, this anti-vax movement just seems to have picked up steam now, especially since the beginning of January. Since I've been monitoring this. And it just seems that since the beginning of January, it's just, and this sort of coincided with the announcement that Namibia should be receiving a batch of vaccines sometime in February. Was said in early February, end of January, early February. I haven't seen anything that suggests that we've actually received any vaccines. Maybe that will be announced today by the president at this afternoon's COVID-19 briefing. So it's become problematic, not just here. The sort of problematic information, the falsehoods and the disinformation and so on. But it's a global problem, and it needs to be confronted, needs to be countered, and the media needs to plays an important role in this, and the media has to step up and actually confront the falsehoods we're seeing about the vaccines and so on, that we still haven't received, as far as I know. So this is the backdrop against which we're having this discussion.
This infodemic has already been almost, you can say, deadly I mean, fake news has led to, I think, globally over 800 deaths and people being hospitalized because they drank methanol and ate cow dung. And, so it has grave consequences. And I do think what you're saying is important. The media, we play an integral part in
Mm.
dispelling these mistruths. But before we get into how we deal with these facts or mistruths, why do you think people would spread fake news about vaccines? Why this anti-vaccination movement?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of this comes from the toxic American political environment. This anti-vaccination movement is very much this modern iteration of it that we're seeing spreading via social media is very much an American movement that has spread the sort of these falsehoods um, around the world. They've now globalized these falsehoods, this information, and you see a lot of a repetition of a lot of the stuff that we saw around in American anti-vaccination groups. You're seeing these sorts of things being repeated, um, being repeated in some of the comments we're seeing in Namibia now. In a lot of the comments, actually, it's just a repeat of what you saw in American social media groups and what's been reported around vaccines and so on. And people are repeating this stuff, is parroting this stuff. So there isn't anything new here. So this comes very much out of, sort of a troubling movement that has amplified things like this pandemic conspiracy theories around vaccines and things, baseless claims around vaccines, and it speaks to a certain sort of mindset that is anti-scientific, anti-expert, that believes, uh, governments and authorities are to be distrusted, and of course the amplification comes in with how social media algorithms interact or engage with the sort of content that these sorts of groups produce and then post on social media platforms, and then because of the way these algorithms work, they amplify sort of the sort of emotive content, and it pushes it out there, and it pushes it beyond the actual audience that it was meant for initially, which is sort of this American anti-vaxxer American audience. It's now spilled out of those those sort of groups and polluted the whole social media ecosystem globally, that you see a lot of these things being replicated, repeated, and so on. And it keeps coming, goes around and keeps coming back, even if it's debunked. And it feeds into this distrust narrative globally of world of global organizations, of governments, of authoritative sources, to an extent that they are now, according to these people who produce this stuff, that they are now no longer any authority worth trusting, and everybody is on their own. There's this global conspiracy, so it feeds this conspiracy-minded, um, um, you know, uh, 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 I don't know, mentality.
Yeah.
Um, and 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 I mean, you can sort of see where a lot of this is coming from, because I mean, governments have done a lot of the last few years, decades, to generate this distrust. And a lot of communication mistakes have been made over the last year since the COVID-19 pandemic went global. From the Chinese government at first, it's denials, and then it's clamped down on information, and then it's non-transparency around the actual details of what happened in Wuhan and so on. And since then, I mean, there have been a number of missteps by important global authorities such as the World Health Organization. They've made mistakes in terms of communication and approaches and so on. And there have been mistakes by the US's CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And these have been amplified and sort of by these actors to sort of say, look, these authorities are lying to you. Look at them. They said this and now they're saying this. And so it's a confluence of factors that have played a role here. And fear, of course, fear and uncertainty and insecurity. They fed these amongst these audiences on social media and in the general public out there, even offline. So it's we've had this dark cloud of disinformation that has just swept the globe, and there's a confluence of factors and so on that played a role in this.
Yeah, and I mean, it is scary. There's so many different facts coming out on a daily basis. It is incredibly difficult to determine what to trust and what not to trust. And I think we also had the conversation earlier this year that, as you said, social media is an echo chamber. So you end up getting more and more of the same type of news that you're engaging with, regardless of whether the sources are credible or not. So there's definitely a challenge, particularly for journalists, to make sense of it all. So where do you start? Maybe you can tell us, I'm a journalist, I want to know the truth about these vaccines. I've heard rumors about ivermectin, and I've seen on CNN that certain companies are, pushing this product as a potential treatment. Where do I start?
Yeah, I mean, I usually point people to the Coronavirus Facts Alliance of the International Fact-Checking Network. I mean, they've now done over 10,000 COVID-19 related fact checks. And just to give you an idea, I mean, of how this isn't a new, what we're seeing around vaccines isn't a new thing. By June last year, the Coronavirus Facts Alliance, which is an alliance of fact checkers around the world, focused on debunking COVID-19 related disinformation. And by June last year, by about mid-June last year, already over 200 fact checks had been published about COVID-19 vaccines. And at that stage, they weren't even vaccines. Those were the early stages of vaccine development. And already over 200 debunks had been published worldwide around vaccines. That's only grown. So I would definitely, if you want to see some of the things, I mean, and some of these myths and falsehoods that had already been debunked by June last year, we now see them reappearing in Facebook and WhatsApp groups, especially. And they'd already been debunked over 6-7 months ago. So I would definitely point people to the Coronavirus Facts database. If you click on the articles, they provide, if you go into the articles, you'll see there are links, in-text links that you can click on that take you through to expert sources. So definitely I showed people there if they want to sort of see what debunking of certain myths and hoaxes and disinformation looks like. So the Coronavirus Facts Alliance. And then, of course, I mean, if you go to the World Health Organization's COVID-19 page, and the things that they've published there, you get a lot of information there as well around vaccines, such as, I mean, there are currently 15 vaccines in various stages of being approved by the World Health Organization. Some of them have already been approved and are being administered in parts of the world. And you can see the progress of these vaccines. I mean, there's a spreadsheet there where you can look at where exactly in the approval processes and clinical trial processes some of these vaccines are. So, I mean, the resources are out there. People can take a look at this stuff. It's on the internet. But for debunks, I'd say Coronavirus Facts Alliance, and then also the COVID-19 related page of AFP Fact Check, which I find also very useful, just to sort of see where what sort of vaccine disinformation are being spread in parts of the world, various parts of the world, and then to sort of track when and how it emerges on, for instance, Namibian social media. And then also how it's also important to look at how they approach the fact check itself, how these various fact checks are approached, and then to try and do the same here and adapt it to our conditions here, to our media market here, and see how we can approach this. So it's important to take a look at how others have done it. And there certainly, as I said, there are resources out there. Even when you go to the Coronavirus Facts Alliance page, and there are a lot of important links there that you can take a look at, that they link to from associated fact checkers and others, that you can address, that you can take a look at and how you can address this. So I mean, there's an article that was published in June by the Coronavirus Facts Alliance about the nature of some of this vaccine disinformation, and it's worth reading and then taking a look at some of these fact checks. And then since then, of course, there have been others. Other articles written today. Even there's an article in the New York Times that tries and advises health authorities around and government authorities how to communicate around the vaccines. The Daily Maverick published an article last week about sort of the sort of crisis communication that needs to take place, calling for a truth offensive needs to be unrolled in order to counter COVID-19 vaccine misinformation.
And as you mentioned earlier, I think we do need to get into the audience questions, but before that, we did discuss earlier. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. The fact that not just journalists, but government entities and scientists as well, there does seem to be a bit of a gap of back and forth communication, or really accurate, informative, news that's supposed to go out in a timely fashion. I'm going to give you a few minutes just to tell me what did you mean about that? How do we improve communication between experts and the media?
So, I mean, this has been coming on for a long time. As I said, I mean, we started seeing vaccine disinformation already in March, April last year, going global, and there have been debunks around that. And your health authorities, your global health authorities, your local health authorities have been really slow to engage with this disinformation. And now that the vaccines are out there, now all of a sudden there is this crisis in trying to get across the facts. When we saw this coming, it's so disheartening when you look at this and you see, I mean, this could have been avoided already a year ago. This thing was already happening. Vaccine disinformation was going global, and the response was really slow. And to the point that here in Namibia now, I mean, just this week, the Ministry of Health started using its social media profiles. I see these things on Twitter now, where they have this COVID-19 vaccine, this little panel of information on it, something like, sort of an frequently asked questions format. Are the COVID-19 vaccines safe? Things like that, and it gives you a bullet point breakdown and so on. But this week, this I started seeing this, sort of, I think over the weekend, and from Monday onwards. This week, this information has been happening for more than a year now, and only now you see this response. Now you can see how not just us as fact checkers or journalists, but also health authorities are on the back foot, because now people have already engaged for months with the disinformation, and some people have been convinced by it. And now you're trying to counter that when people have been confronted with the falsehood for so long. Now you're trying to step in there and engaging with this. I mean, I don't know if whatever is going to happen now in terms of the communication will be effective. I hope so. I hope it's a lot more intensive than what we're seeing at the moment, but there needs to be better communication. There needs to be consistent and continuous communication around what's happening around vaccines globally, what we can expect, which vaccine will be available in Namibia, through which facility. Will it be the COVAX facility? Will it be some other way that we'll be receiving these vaccines? How much are we paying for these vaccines? All of this stuff has already been said, but they need to be continuously, reinforced. And the vaccine communication needs to be sort of devolved to stand alone. That you need to constantly be monitoring what is being said on social media, what people are spreading around. I saw a WhatsApp group. Somebody showed me a WhatsApp group which they were last week. I think it was on Friday, and the amount of anti-vaccine, just postings and content in that WhatsApp group. And these were senior people in government, senior people in politics, senior people in business, in this WhatsApp group. And all of this stuff in that WhatsApp group. It's shocking. Now, these are the sort of people that, some of these people are decision makers, parliamentarians, decision makers in society, in various institutional environments. Now, if these are the people who are confronting and spreading this sort of disinformation around vaccines, or engaging with this sort of content, what do we expect from, your average person out there? So really, government communication, health authorities communication around this really needed to be a lot better than what it is at this stage. How do we draw back? How do we counter now, all that, the falsehoods and myths and stuff that has been out there already for months? How do we do that now? That remains to be seen,
I'm very interested to hear if there's any of the participants, anyone listening in on social media, particularly journalists, have you tried to reach out to the Ministry of Health regarding rumors around the vaccinations, COVID-19 vaccinations, particularly in Namibia? Have you tried to reach out to them, and what was the response like? Please, I invite you, leave your comments and your questions on our social media pages, or if you're a participant on the Zoom call, just pop your comments in the chat box. So that would be really great to find out. Okay, Frederico, we've got a bunch of questions here from journalists. Now, to not spread any more fake news, I'm going to try and filter out the ones that are very, very scientific and specific, because as you said, we're not experts on the vaccination itself, but some of these you've probably engaged with through the Namibia Fact-Checking Network. Let's look at the first, probably most prominent one, the New World Order and Bill Gates's, drive to implant microchips in us with vaccinations. How do we feel about these rumors? What are your comments?
We've seen these the Bill Gates hoaxes, coming on for most of the year, the Bill Gates related hoaxes, and they just keep going. And it's part of this whole conspiracy-minded mentality that has infected and polluted social media, and sort of, polluted the whole vaccine information and the COVID-19 information landscape. And it really isn't new. I once again would sort of refer people to the to the Coronavirus Facts Alliance database, you'll see the number of Bill Gates and New World Order related debunks out there. I mean, it is truly amazing that the stuff just keeps going, and it's been debunked. And I mean, the platforms have stepped in there and dealt with a lot of this stuff, censoring some of this content and so on, takedowns and so on. But the stuff keeps going, and it's it's clearly false, and so on. So I mean, take a look at what others have published. If you just Google, just Google, you don't have to go to the Coronavirus Facts Alliance. If you just Google Bill Gates vaccine disinformation, I mean, a whole host of stuff. And this is because of Bill Gates's prominence within the COVAX facility, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and their involvement in vaccinations in different parts of the world, especially in Africa and Southeast Asia. So I mean, there's a lot there, and it just keeps going. At Namibia Fact Check, we've done debunks around this stuff. In fact, I mean, we've done a few vaccine debunks in the first half of last year already. If you go on our website, you'll see these debunks, vaccine-related debunks. So I mean, we've been at this for about a year now, and it just people just need to take a look at how others have dealt with these sorts of falsehoods and hoaxes and myths, and try and adapt it to a Namibian audience. And then point people to, look, this has already gone around. People have debunked this. You point out that others have already proved that this is false, or provide people with the facts that speak to the situation that you want to address. So there are sources out there that you can turn to as a journalist to address this.
This morning I read a quote: "Whenever a child learns to think critically, a conspiracy theory dies." And I think that's a big job as a journalist. If you hear this rumor, ask the questions why. Ask, would there people in the world, are they out to get Bill Gates, and why? Microchipping through that audible, why? Kind of go a little bit further than your nose. Don't just consume blindly. I'm going to try and get, maybe there's some of these other questions that you are capable of answering. One of them, I think, is Namibia specific, and I know you did mention it before. Is the vaccine already in Namibia, and are people dying from it?
As far as we know, I mean, the minister in his COVID-19 briefing earlier in when was it, in January, the health minister, Dr. Shangula, pointed out that Namibia expects to receive a batch of vaccines towards the end of January into early February. We haven't heard anything since then about a batch of vaccines actually having arrived here. And certainly not anything about vaccines being administered. Speaking to the second part of that, about people dying. Now, more than 100 million people around the world have to date been vaccinated in different countries around the world. More than 100 million. And there has not been a single death from any of the vaccines that has been administered. Not a single death that can be sort of tied to a vaccine. Not a single death. There was last week or 2 weeks ago, there was the issue that made headlines about 23 people dying in Norway after having been vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine. Norwegian health authorities, came out and said there is no evidence that it is related to the Pfizer vaccine, because these were already very elderly, very frail individuals, and their basically what they were saying was, I mean, these people probably would have died anyway, at around that, because they were already in a condition that, you know, in a condition of health frailty that they were close to death anyway when they were given these vaccines. So Norwegian health authorities said, you know, look, there's no evidence that the Pfizer vaccine caused this. Of course, this was the specific incident was, of course, it went viral on social media, and you know, the anti-vaccine crowd used this to point to the vaccines being dangerous and you know, population control and these sorts of things. But I mean, the facts are that, you know, as those health authorities have pointed out, the people that were given the vaccine were already at that stage, you know, probably close to death already. So, you know, just to reiterate, there have been 0 deaths directly tied to any of the vaccines, and there are now, I think, 6 or, you know, a number of vaccines being administered in different parts of the world. There are 15 vaccines that are being looked at for approval by the World Health Organization, of which about half of those are already being rolled out and people being vaccinated with them. So, I mean, you know, the information once again is out there. The statements by the Norwegians are out there. The statements by the World Health Organization are out there, by various other health authorities. So 0 deaths, and people aren't dying in Namibia. We would have noticed, you know.
Now, Frederico, I'm going to stop you there for a second. We just got a question from Heta McKay. Seems people are still very concerned about the Bill Gates story. She's asking what exactly makes the Bill Gates story a hoax. She wants to know if you're the custodian of facts. And then she asked, how about events 201 or 201? Is that a hoax as well? I don't know if you know about events 201. But there seems to still be a lot of uncertainty over the Bill Gates story. So I don't know if it's worth going into that a little bit more. And then I'm also going to ask you, whilst we're talking about this death story, I know that the FDA also has a website where they record every single case that has got anything to do with the vaccination. And I think unverified, there have been 0.6% of the people who have been vaccinated have been hospitalized, and these are unverified. So again, as you said, the sources are out there, let's use them. But maybe let's give Heta a chance. She's really eager to know, what makes the Bill Gates story a hoax?
You know, it's not just one thing. You know, the Bill Gates gets tied to which specific Bill Gates hoax. You know, Bill Gates is in so many of them, and they all sort of different. But I mean, the whole microchipping thing. You know, if you go and Google, you know, the sort of the microchipping, how it would work in your blood and stuff. There are people who explain this stuff. You know, how improbable. Yeah, you know, how improbable that technology is at this stage. You know, I mean, the stuff is just, the technology doesn't even exist at this stage. You know, so I mean, if you take a look at some of the debunks of this hoax that's out there, and that's not me. I'm not the custodian of facts. I mean, there are people out there who've looked at this stuff as experts and said, you know, this is pure nonsense, just on the technological sophistication that would be required. And that stuff is out there. Go and take a look at it. And it gives you it will explain to you why, you know, sort of that microchipping nonsense is just pure fantasy. And then you can, you know, then you can take a look at all the other Bill Gates hoaxes, and you'll see that, you know, a lot of the stuff is just, you know, pure fantasy. and they've already been debunked by experts. So I mean, I really encounter people go to the Coronavirus Facts Alliance database, put in Bill Gates microchip, and see what comes up. You'll see how the stuff is explained and so on. And there are links there that you can click through to the links and read what the experts are saying that people interviewed for some of this stuff. So I mean, please, some of these things are so obviously nonsense that you just wonder how do people get around to believing such things?
Yeah, and I think mind control is a multi-billion-dollar business. So it's going to cost a lot to chip everyone on the global population. I think the cost alone should dispel any fears around that. Frederico, we've got, I think, about 20 minutes left. I do want you to, before we wrap up, just talk about how to tell if a source is fake or not. But before we get there, maybe you have some knowledge to share with us. There have been a lot of questions about the new variants of COVID and how effective the current vaccines are against these variants. I know this is a very uncharted territory and is difficult because this virus, which makes it so different to the flu, for instance, is its ability to mutate so quickly. So I don't know if you do have the answers, or perhaps you could point us in the right direction. Are we detecting these different variants, and how useful is a vaccine against these new variants?
Yeah, I mean, so I just if you go to the World Health Organization page, the COVID-19, sort of their web pages there, they have podcasts on this stuff. If you go, I mean, let me just quickly go there and because I really think this is stuff that people need to engage with. So, I mean, if you, for instance, there's a whole page there on COVID-19 vaccines, Q&As and the landscape of vaccines, what vaccines are out there and so on. Let me just see something. There are some podcasts here, and one of the episodes, the first episode that comes up here is episode 23. I think this is a question that people also asked. I am vaccinated. What next? And in this video and in the podcast, and there's a transcript as well that you can read. You get sort of the information around, if I've been vaccinated, can I be infected again? And it's all explained there by this expert, this Dr. Catherine O'Brien and so on. And there are other episodes looking at the myths and the science, and other areas around the vaccines. Just repeat what you just asked me, because I think I lost track of that now.
How effective is the current vaccine against the new variants or the new strands of COVID that we've seen, for instance, in Brazil?
Yeah. So, I mean, I haven't seen anything here yet on the World Health Organization page on that, but there are scientific papers out on this. Over the last few days, there have been some, scientific papers, preprints that have been published on this, of studies that have been done. Some of it is very concerning. Might be able to, avoid being disabled by a vaccine. Yeah. By the vaccines currently out there. And it's out there. I mean, I can probably look for it. I don't have it on this because this is not my laptop I'm sitting on and at the moment, but I
Well,
have it on
perhaps
my
it's
own
something we could
station.
share. We could share on our social media pages at a
Yeah,
later stage.
yeah,
Just some proper credible links there. I think that would be very useful.
yeah.
And
We can
yeah,
always share that, yes.
yeah.
And people can take
About,
a look at what the science is saying at this stage.
yeah,
But I mean, the science around the actual impact of the vaccines is I mean, it's still emergent,
yeah,
because the vaccines have only really been being administered since about early to mid December, um, and in other parts of the world, sort of, since the beginning of this month and so on. So it's
yeah,
still early, and we're only now starting to see, the effects and so on. But there's already, there's already some indicators out there of how the vaccines work. And in most cases, they seem to be doing fine against, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and some of the variants. And of course, as I said, I mean, over the last few days, last week, we've started seeing, you know, so concerning sort of signals around a specific variant, and how it's able, probably, how the vaccines might not be um, um, effective against, or as effective against it as against, the the original virus. But I mean, once again, the information, there is information available, and as I said, we can share that
yeah.
on the social media once, this we're done with this over the next few
I
days.
think we'll do that with a lot of these questions that we're not going to get to. We will share credible sources where you can read up and do your own research. Before I think we have about 10, 15 minutes left. And Frederico, I know that this is something that Namibia Fact Check is very eager over. That's teaching journalists how to make sure your source is credible. If I have a question, how many times do I need to get vaccinated, or how long will my vaccination last? And I type this into the Google search bar. How do I know where to click? How do I know which one of these news agencies are fake news agencies or real news agencies? So perhaps you could
Yeah,
help a little.
I
But
mean,
before we get there,
my yeah.
I just want to share a tidbit here that Andrew shared in our chat bar. He just says, sorry, I just have to share this with you guys. He says that the Bill Gates hoax started on Instagram, and it was denounced early on in the pandemic. So was a 201 issue. The latter also did not predict COVID. A lot of the hoaxes were either invented or spread by elements of QAnon in Namibia. So I think that's also very interesting. And I do encourage all our journalists, do a bit of research about QAnon. It's a very, very interesting platform that's getting a lot right when it comes to conspiracy theories. So please go research QAnon. All right. So Frederico, I'm a journalist. I'm doing a search. I saw this headline on Facebook. It says vaccinations cause cancer in 10% of patients. Now what? What do I do with this headline?
Well, if you saw it on Facebook, I mean, first thing I would say, just don't share it. At this stage, you
Don't
just have
share.
to tell people, if it's on
Yeah,
social media, if it's in a messaging app, you
very
probably
important.
have to distrust it.
Yeah. Okay.
Your
So if you
first
don't
instinct
know, don't
at this
share.
stage, yeah, at this stage in in the COVID-19 pandemic, at this stage, if you're still, if you're still unclear about, the level of nonsense that just is being spread, then you haven't been paying attention. I mean,
Yeah.
at this stage, if you're seeing anything COVID-19 related in your WhatsApp groups, and it's not coming from health authorities or whatever, and it's unattributed and stuff, you just, that says it right there. So I mean, people really at this stage should be a lot more skeptical about the stuff that is being shared around in WhatsApp groups and on Facebook and so on. And I think in a lot of cases people are. I mean, I was monitoring a Facebook page, and people were people would. There was a lot of COVID-19 related myths and hoaxes and stuff being shared there. And what you started seeing was a lot of people jumping in there and telling people, stop spreading this, man. This is not true. Stop spreading this fake stuff. And you had these, and then of course you had these disinformation peddlers jumping back in. Yeah, but and there's usually this thing about how do you know it's not? How do you know it's not true? But a lot of the stuff is actually very easily proved, false.
Yeah.
They are actually, and if it's, if to get back to your question, my first response to a question: how do I, trust this thing that I just saw, or my first, what I do first is I go and see what the World Health Organization has to say.
Mm-hmm.
I go and see what the CDC has, CDC has to say. Mm-hmm. I go and see what credible health authorities have to say. That should be your first port of call. Go and see what the health authorities have to say about this. That still matters. I mean, the health experts are still the health experts. They've made some mistakes along the way in terms of communication, but they still remain the experts. And the science isn't, it isn't perfect. And, a lot of the early assumptions and things, and a lot of the early messaging has been problematic in the first quarter of last year of 2020. But that a lot has been established about COVID-19 since then. A lot has been learned. A lot is known now. So, go to the established credible health authorities. And as I said, there's this whole podcast series that the World Health Organization has, where you can read a transcript, you can see, you can watch the video, or you can listen to the audio file there, and it gives you an idea of what's busy happening, and where the science is taking us, and so on. So really, you don't need to be clicking on dubious links in Facebook posts at this stage.
You don't have an excuse anymore, really.
Exactly.
Even if you type in a headline $hoax, or you go, as you said, CDC, WHO, FDA, they are all scientific publication. WHO website. Type in your headline of excuses anymore to follow conspiracy theories. I just see Andrew says, and that's hello. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. And just see Andrew says the problem with the WHO is there are too many facts and they completely ruin good humor. And I think we tend to do that. We tend to sensationalize things. And science doesn't give way to sensation, unfortunately. So let's keep a level head. Is there something, if journalists want, I know that you guys have offered in the past social media verification workshops. Is that something that journalists can engage you guys in? How do they go about that? And what do these workshops do?
Yeah, we're trying to, it's more general sort of social media verification workshop, but we really need to develop something for COVID-19 specific. We haven't done up to this stage, but a lot of what we do in that workshop sort of speaks to how you can verify information around a lot of this stuff. But we made a video also with NMT in the second half of last year, where I just point people to sources and how to approach conspiracy theories and things like these around COVID-19. It should be on the NMT's YouTube channel. So if you watch that video, you'll see some of the things. I also speak to some of the verification elements that we address in our workshop. But there's, really, there are a lot of approaches out there. First Draft has wonderful resources for journalists and how to report around COVID-19 and how to do verification of information around COVID-19. So there's a lot out there. I really would point people to First Draft. First Draft resources. First Draft is sort of a global organization that works in the space of researching disinformation and providing guidance to journalists around how to deal with myths and hoaxes and conspiracies, and how to prize out, facts and evidence and so forth. So there are resources out there, and I point to this as well in that video we did last year. So there are places people can go for that sort of thing. Can you just repeat the first half of your question or the statement that you made? I wanted to say something about that, but I've sort of lost.
What did I ask
train of
you,
thought on that.
Frederico? I can't even remember.
Yeah, maybe we can rewind this.
Yeah, I think we were just talking about how do you make sure that this is the right thing? Like what steps can journalists take? But I think you've given us a good overview. Do you have any final?
Now remember. Can I just jump in there?
Go for it.
So I wanted to say something about the quality of communication. I mean, I think one part of the problem is, and I see there, is the, that is not just Namibia specific, but it's an issue that's now become sort of prominent globally, is how scientists and health authorities communicate and how they need to do better communication, especially around when it's public health crises, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. There really ought to be better communication because they have public health authorities, the scientific community has really lost the battle for communication over the last year. So there really ought to be better communication out there. And I think this is something that the scientific community, the health community has now realized, especially with around the crisis now around vaccine communication. And I think in the proposals are now to have a communication course in medical, in medical training, in scientific training, to have a stream of speaking to how to communicate better with the general public. And this needs to happen because this has shown, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown how the communication aspect has just been totally mishandled by public health authorities, by the scientific community, globally and at national levels. So there really needs to be more of that. And of course, on the other side of that is the whole media information literacy element, where people, your general public, we really need to do a better job of having people engage more critically with information, and not just to fall for the first bit of nonsense that comes by on their social media feed, and how to verify information for themselves. So there needs to be an intervention at educational level, whether it's your basic educational level or your tertiary education level, or both, in terms of media information literacy around this sort of thing, and not to fall for this sort of information. So there needs to be that as well. And of course that won't change the situation, but it helps. Media information literacy isn't the answer. There isn't one single answer in this. There are a lot of things that need to be addressed for us to. But hopefully we've learned the lesson with COVID-19 that going forward, when health crises such as these emerge, that we don't make the same mistakes making now with COVID-19. So yeah, I mean, I just thought I needed to
Definitely.
say that at this
Frederico,
stage.
I'm going to stop you there. I'm just gonna do a quick wrap up. We hear what you say. We as media have a indelible responsibility to separate fact from fiction, to leave our emotion at the door, to think critically about every piece of information out there, no matter how strongly your opinion is over it. Because at the end of the day, this is science. And this is important science because COVID isn't going to go away overnight. And this vaccination has come very quickly and miraculously, and we should give science a chance. If we didn't give science a chance, we'd still be stuck with a global pandemic of polio, for instance. So use the credible sources. To all the journalists out there, we're going to be sharing on the NMT social media pages with Frederico's help. We will be sharing credible sources that you can go to fact check. Make sure that whatever you publish, you have a responsibility toward people. You have a responsibility to stop the spread of this disease with or without the vaccination. And we're only going to do so if we stick to the truth that's been verified by scientific fact. So I think that's all from us for today. Any final words from you, Frederico?
Yeah, I mean, I think really, I mean, I think the Namibian media need to step up in this space because the amount of falsehoods we're seeing out there, as I said earlier, I mean, this WhatsApp group that somebody showed me that they're in, that it's just terrible. It's horrific what's happening, the levels of disinformation. And really, we need to step into this space. We need to be confronting a lot of this nonsense and debunking this stuff. And calling out the people who are spreading this stuff at this stage. And I mean, as the media, we really shouldn't be, at this point in the COVID-19 pandemic, wandering around looking for credible sources. I mean, at this point, we should know who they are, and to be, putting them front and center, and putting the facts front and center on this stuff, a lot of this stuff, and we really shouldn't. There shouldn't be an excuse for making mistakes around, how we communicate the facts at this point, because the resources to deal with this are out there. We can make use of them. They are open. They are free. And we really should be doing a better job at this point.
Definitely. I definitely agree with you. And on those somber words, we're going to end this session. I want to encourage everyone, social media users and participants. This recording will be on our social media pages as well. But if you'd like to share it in your office or with your colleagues, reach out to Emily at NMT. And we look forward to the next session